Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. I want to thank Leo and the Al Shanker Institute for inviting me, and say it's a pleasure to be on this panel with Randy and Josh. I think you're going to hear a lot of overlap in our comments already. I'm going to, like Josh, start with some questions, though. And I think the first thing is, what do we want standards for, and who should be accountable? All right, and I'll come back to both of those because I don't think we are clear about those things. In the same way as I think Josh is right, we're not clear about the problem we're trying to fix. And the problem, nobody named the problem I think we should be focused on, which is inequality. And the fact is that our schools are heavily implicated in the reproduction of inequality in America today. I want to start, though, by pointing out, and this might seem like heresy, that No Child Left Behind actually moved the country a step forward. It did because for the first time in this country's history, there was a law that said all children, regardless of their backgrounds, must be learning. Rod Page, some remember him, used to say we could end the achievement gap right now if we simply stopped testing kids. We wouldn't know. Some of you will also remember the bell curve came out in 1994. The debate was about whether or not African American children were genetically inferior. That is, for the longest time in this country's history, we had a belief that intelligence was in the genes, and some kids were just not as smart as others. No Child Left Behind changed that and said, no, all kids, regardless of learning needs, English language learners, there's got to be evidence for all of them, and it's got to be disaggregated. Right? And that changed things. And I want to at least acknowledge that because I think if Katie Haycock were on the panel, she would remind us of the world before No Child Left Behind was not a good world. We had kids graduate from high school who were functionally illiterate in many parts of the country. At the same time, we have these huge challenges, and Josh described the challenges in Montgomery County, but they're equally big throughout the country, sometimes even bigger when you go to places like Michigan and California, where child poverty rates are 1 out of 3. Kids who are in families in poverty. And we have, again, large numbers of immigrant kids and schools overwhelmed by the needs. And lots of clear evidence, as Randy said already, many kids who graduate from our schools unprepared for college-level work. That is, despite the fact that we've been fixated on testing, something is clearly wrong with what we've been doing. And that's not just poor kids. There are many middle-class kids who are simply not prepared for college. So the real question to me is, what would meaningful accountability look like? And I want to echo Josh. I do think we've got to be focused on outcomes, but I think we've got to do more than just look at test scores. I think Randy's right that we've got to look at actual evidence, and the performance-based assessment schools have shown us that when kids are capable of writing and producing work that you can actually examine, that kind of hard evidence provides even more assurance that kids will be prepared than what we've been relying on so far. I would also say that we've got to be focused on the educational process as well. That is, outcomes aren't good enough. We've got to ask, are the conditions in place in schools that give kids a chance to be successful? Is there quality in the way we are implementing programs? So many of the programs we know in schools, Title I and special ed being prime examples of these, are often of very poor quality. And results in many parents trying to avoid these programs because there's no fidelity to implementation. And then third, are the support systems in place to address the non-academic needs of kids? And those are health, nutrition, but they're also the psychological, the emotional needs of kids. And important, again, to realize that it's not just about poverty. We have large numbers of middle-class kids who are not getting the support they need. The suicide is a much greater problem, drug abuse, eating disorders amongst affluent white children than amongst poor children of color. So we have to broaden our conceptions of standards. I want to say the Schott Foundation's been a leader on this, and I applaud the work of focusing on opportunity to learn standards. And to me, that's part of the shift we've got to begin to make. Are qualified teachers in the schools? Is there access to adequate facilities and learning materials? Are we addressing the non-academic needs of children? The analogy I would make is the way we think about accountability in airports, in highways, in the water supply. We don't hold consumers accountable. We hold those who build the roads and run the airports and put out the food, hold them accountable and hold them to the standards that are set. There's not a single state in the country that holds itself accountable for the conditions in schools. Not one. I'll come back to that as we look at state control of schools. So we need to rethink the assumptions guiding our policy. I would say right now, and we heard Josh speak to this already, there's an assumption that low-performing schools are simply staffed by lazy people, and if you pressure them enough, humiliate them enough, shut their schools down, they will improve. We have absolutely no evidence that this will work. But we see that strategy being pursued throughout the country. We continue to believe that just threatening kids with denying them a diploma will be an incentive. In many cases, these, again, are kids who've known nothing but failure in schools. Again, not a great strategy. And then we have very little evidence that just giving kids the option to choose is going to solve this, because there are lots of schools that don't choose kids with great needs. School choice only works if there's lots and lots of good choices. And if the schools don't choose, but in fact parents choose. And there's not a system that works like that today. So I would add that we've got to get better at learning about why the reforms we pursued haven't worked. Right? I mean, Josh already talked to the PISA results, which show on the international comparisons we're falling further and further behind. So something is clearly wrong with what we're doing. And I would say it's not simply money, though money's always part of the equation. I would say that we focus too much on gimmicks and fads. We keep thinking there's a silver bullet. Right now, the Common Core, at least for some, is the game changer. There is no game changer. Let's face that. It always comes down to the basic ingredients. The University of Chicago said there were 5 essential ingredients: the capacity of the educational staff, leadership, school culture, parent engagement, and continuous support for the education staff, the teachers in the schools. And I would say if we ignore those things, we will never get to where we need to be. We have to work much more at doing reform with the people who work in our schools, not to them. We don't do this in other industries. Right? If you think about, in most other industries, we talk about banking or the military or healthcare, the professional associations have a lot of say on the kinds of policies that are adopted. Not true in education. In education, I often say, those who know the least have the most say. Those who know the most have no say at all, and it shows in the kinds of policies we pursue. Clearly, this is not about getting rid of testing, because I think we have to have evidence that kids are learning. So then the question is, what's appropriate? What is appropriate is for assessment to be used as a diagnostic tool. Right? We've known this for years. That is, that the most value to a test is what it tells you about what a child has learned or not learned, and then our ability to respond quickly to the learning needs. In most states, we administer the test in the spring. We give the results back to the teachers in the fall when they no longer have the children. That makes no sense, because we're using testing largely for the purpose of ranking and monitoring, not for the purpose of intervening and providing the support children need. We need to rethink the way we use testing. We need to develop more individualized learning plans for kids. We need to figure out an approach to value-added measures. I probably stopped clicking the slides so I couldn't see them. And we need to really look at things like performance-based assessment and actual evidence that kids are prepared for college based on what they can write and what they can do. And then we need to totally rethink accountability. Josh alluded to this already. What about governors? What about state legislatures? When Joe Klein was the chancellor of New York City, I kept asking him, what are you accountable for? Because that was his mantra, accountability. And he would say, I'm accountable for holding everyone else accountable. That's the problem. We have top-down accountability, where those with the most responsibility and authority have none. This is a problem. Right now, you have several states that have taken over failing schools. In New Jersey, every major urban district, with the exception of Elizabeth, is under state control. Newark has been under state control for 15 years, and there's no evidence that it's getting any better. When will the state be held accountable for its inability to improve those schools? But we have thought of accountability as something we do to others and buffer those in power, and therefore they face no scrutiny on what they've done. I also would say this, and Josh lives this every day. If you go to affluent schools, who are they accountable to? They're accountable to the parents they serve, because they let them know. And if parents are not part of the accountability equation, I would say we will continue to see schools in poor communities that treat parents with indifference and worse. And so parents have to be built into the accountability equation. Lastly, we've got to build partnerships between schools and universities and other organizations, because schools can't do it by themselves, particularly in high-need communities. So a lot of this requires a whole shift in the way we're thinking about education. We need to keep moving away from the ideas that intelligence is an innate property. We have lots of evidence in the neurosciences that the brain continues to develop. The focus should be on how do we continue to support children, challenge, stimulate, create learning environments where kids are excited about learning. That should be the focus of our work. We should be much more focused on cultivating talent and strengths in children than we do right now. We should be developing teaching strategies that are focused on how kids actually learn. Right now, I'd say in too many schools I visit, the expectation is kids will learn the way we teach. And if they can't do it, we blame the kids. And then lastly, we got to totally fix and change the way we do discipline, because we are invariably pushing out the neediest kids and almost always pushing them out because of needs that are not addressed. So the quote that I think many of us know, not everything that counts can be measured, and not everything that can be measured counts, has to be reminded. You know, do kids, does having art, is that going to result in higher PISA scores? I don't care. Kids need art, they need music, they need phys ed, they need recess, they need a well-rounded education. We have allowed this narrow focus on accountability to allow us to deprive kids of essential ingredients. Howard Gardner often says that it was common in this country for the longest time for every kindergarten teacher to have a piano in the classroom and to know how to play it. Pianos are gone because it's seen as irrelevant to education. Well, kids still love music. And there's absolutely no reason why we should allow our kids to have a deprived education when we live in a country with so many resources. Thank you.